We're in a French drain. A French drain is a mechanism by which we move water away from the foundation of the house. Now, this house actually doesn't have a basement. It only has a crawl space. So why do we have a French drain? Well, if you look up behind me, we have a hillside. And we know from previous experiences with this house, before we tore down the original house, that this house had a lot of problems with subgrade water, meaning water that came underneath the ground. Also, it has problems with water coming off of that hillside, going across the land, hitting the house, and then going underneath the house. So how are we addressing that? Well, in this project, we dug down extra far. So this is a way deeper crawl space. And the reason it's a deeper crawl space is we wanted to have essentially a barrier for water to get underneath the house. And this drain, which wraps around the uphill side of the foundation, is going to catch all the water. So imagine if the hillside was here and the water was coming down, whether the water came down on the top of the ground or it came down through the ground itself and came out here, it would hit this big void. Now, this big void is not actually a big void when we're done. It's filled with rock. And at the bottom of that rock, it has a pipe. We call it a perf pipe. And that perf pipe is actually perforated with big holes. Those holes face down. And when they face down, any water that comes through this section, this whole barrier for like 4 feet, is filled with rock. And that rock is big rock with lots of little nooks and crannies between each rock. So there's lots of area for that water to come into this space, fall down, and once it fills up to a certain level, to the bottom of that pipe, it will essentially flow down that pipe and flow out to the drainage, which we have in the front of the house. Now, why is that important? Well, once water gets into your crawl space, it's really hard to get out. There's no air or sun to dry it out. There's no drains typically to remove that water. So we want to keep the water from ever coming into the crawl space. So we do that by putting this drain around this whole house, making sure that we have a downhill slope of that pipe away from the house and into drainage that's downhill of the house. So this barrier protects this foundation. Now, why is it so deep? Well, first of all, this becomes a physical barrier for water to get through. This becomes a secondary barrier. But more importantly, we have insulation behind this net. Now, what does that insulation do? Well, that insulation insulates the crawl space. So now we have a warm crawl space that doesn't have any water in it, and it keeps that whole house very warm and comfortable, but it also functions as a barrier. Now in this area, we have something called radon, and radon is the degradation of plutonium into radioactive gas. Radon is the #2 cause of lung cancer in the United States, only after smoking. So it is a real issue with all houses here, and this is a medium level. So there's 3 levels of radon: low, medium, and high. And the Bay Area has a medium level of radon. So this drain also functions to get rid of radon. This is best practices for everything having to do with crawl spaces. This house is going to be super resilient to any kind of challenge that we have, including falling rock. And we're in the crawl space. Now, first of all, this is a really tall crawl space. This crawl space is so large for a specific reason. The client wants this to be an accessible space. They want to do what most crawl spaces make it really hard to do, which is come underneath the house and make sure that everything's okay. If they decide to change something in the future, they want to be able to come in here and access all the plumbing, any electrical, the insulation, anything else. Now, this is really an important part of crawl spaces, is crawl spaces give you an access to things that are normally hidden under concrete slabs when you build with a concrete slab foundation. Now, slabs are not very common in the Bay Area. And one of the reasons they're not very common is the Bay Area has a lot of what's called expansive soil. And so that expansive soil is a clay. And when that clay gets wet, it expands and grows. On a concrete slab, if that's on top of that clay, what ends up happening is the house moves up. But unfortunately, the house doesn't move up evenly. It moves up unevenly. And so what you end up getting is houses that crack, sheetrock that cracks, windows that break. So how do we do that? How do we address that? Well, on this house, as you see in the pictures, we see that we're drilling holes into the ground. Those are called piers. They're filled with rebar and concrete, and they support the perimeter foundation, which are the stem walls that you see around me. This is not what's called a spread footing foundation. This is actually what's called a pier and grade beam foundation. The heights of these stem walls is directly proportional to how far apart the piers are. If we make a high stem wall that's very, very strong, we can put the piers farther apart so that the house doesn't flex or the foundation doesn't flex in between the piers. If we have a very small, short foundation stem wall, then we have to put the piers closer together so there's little flex. So that's a really important part of this project, is we wanted to minimize the number of piers, but we also wanted to maximize the size of the crawl space. And we did that by making a taller stem wall that was stronger and then making those piers farther apart. That actually saved us money on this project. So we get a better, more accessible crawl space, we get a stronger foundation, and we put less money into the ground in the form of concrete and rebar. This is a perfect implementation of a good crawl space foundation and something we strongly recommend over slab foundations, especially in the Bay Area. If you're interested in learning more about building science or building a better way, hit subscribe as we show you how to build a better way.